you have to begin to ask yourself, as the family are beginning to as well, has someone possibly taken him?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Good morning and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is day 10 since Jay Slater disappeared near the entrance to the rural Datino National Park. That's close to the location where Jay's phone last pinged. That's really our best evidence of where he was and where to begin the search. Now, the disappearance of Jay Slater is really an age-old question. Is man's true enemy nature or himself, or his own nature? Is or was the biggest threat facing the 19-year-old from Lancashire another person, some stranger, or his own poor decision-making within the context of nature? And not just nature, an extraordinary backdrop of plunging ravines, soaring solitary mountains, and black rocky cliffs shining above the crashing Atlantic surf below. Do you think we need to talk a bit more about the topography, or do you think that's kind of boring? It's not really going to take us anywhere. It's mountains. There's nothing more to it. Well, a recent story has just come out demonstrating, illustrating the likelihood of someone getting lost and finding themselves in trouble in Tenerife. According to one article, police officers searching for missing British teenager Jay Slater have come to the rescue of a, quote, tired and disorientated, unquote, Scottish hiker who got stuck in a ravine. Now, the first part to note there is stuck, also that he was in a ravine, and, well, it's going to come out in a moment, but it was in the same area where Jay Slater went missing. And so we are talking about a unusual landscape with ravines. Do you live anywhere near an area where there are deep ravines? Got any experience with that? The important part to note is the words disorientation, that this hiker was apparently tired and disorientated. Disorientation is exactly what we've been saying happens when you dehydrated, and by all accounts, Jay was thirsty and lost. You could even say that when he set off, he was already disorientated because he was heading north from Marca when he should have been heading south. So he started his journey already somewhat disoriented, somewhat confused, somewhat not thinking clearly. And dehydration would only complicate that, which it would do if you were thirsty and lost. Just think about that. You thirsty and lost, and now you're getting more and more disoriented. It's going to be quite hard to get out of that situation if there's no one around you to help you. And so what happens after that? What happens after you're thirsty, you're lost, there's no one around you? What is the inevitable thing that follows? Well, simple, a loss of energy. Like a human battery running down, it's just going to run down lower and lower and lower. And the more time one is outside, exposed to the elements while thirsty, the more dangerous it becomes. It's not rocket science. But I think more has to be made, this is my opinion, I think more has to be made of what we established earlier, the number 2 clue we all missed, the remoteness. Now you might say, wow, this is really boring. There's nothing more we can learn. Well, I can tell you now, I've learned a lot, and Jay's friends said when they went to the area, they were really surprised at what it was like. More about that a little bit later. You know, you might say, yeah, it's remote, no big deal. But just how remote are we talking about? You know, if we're going to compare some nameless, faceless phantom kidnapper to the environment, well, we need to do a better job describing the character that we do know. Right? Think about this landscape as a character with a certain kind of personality. And so it's no surprise that the hiker that got lost didn't just get lost in Tenerife, but in the exact same area as Jay did. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the many of you who have subscribed. By the way, this is me. I'm an author of many books on true crime, on missing persons, several on the Madeleine McCann case as well. If you're enjoying this analysis, and by the end of it, if you feel like you'd like me to go into even further detail, I'm not even going to go into as much detail as I've researched, but if you find you learning certain things, then let me know in the comments. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, what we're doing here is really seeing the landscape, the environment as a character in its own right. Is this character we need to take seriously? And then also, when we get to know that character, should we be taking that character more seriously? And so how we sort of stumble into this area once again is that there was a 51-year-old that had gotten into difficulty in the same region of northwestern Tenerife. And so we've got to start asking questions. What is different about northwestern Tenerife? Is it different? How different is it? What are we actually dealing with? In this analysis, as I say, we want to explore carefully and in detail, in more detail than you've probably done until now, the municipality of Buenavista del Norte, which is arguably one of the emptiest on the island. Even a cursory view of Lonely Planet articles sketches a pretty epic landscape. I mean, the more I'm reading about it, the more I'd like to go there. It really is quite a spectacular landscape. But first, let's get a targeted generic description of Musca, right? Listen to these words. I mean, this is not some true crime creator talking about it. This is someone from Lonely Planet just giving you the rundown on what to expect if you went there. And this is Musca, the town where he was staying, that he left. They were supposed to catch a bus from, but that he walked away from and then got into trouble. This is the Lonely Planet description. I'll put a link to that in the description. Dangling precariously off a cliff, the astonishingly lovely mountain village of Musca is popular among day trippers, and with good reason. It's a knockout. Some say the town is Tenerife's answer to Peru's Machu Picchu, because it's flanked by a tall Huayna Picchu-esque mound, just like the Incan citadel. Many people drop into Stroll Musca's main drag of cafes and souvenir stores, but the real magic lies in the hike through Barranca de Musca, a tough 6-hour round-trip trudge over stream, through orchard, and past mighty walls of vertical rock to the sea. What stands out there? Well, words like dangling precariously over a cliff. Also, tough 6-hour round-trip trudge. Lonely Planet goes on in that same article, noting that you might want to trim your walk in this area to save your legs, and that it might be too exerting for some. In more generic terms, the area where the Scottish hiker apparently got into trouble and where Jay disappeared 10 days ago now isn't just remote. We're not just, okay, it's quite a remote area. It's very remote. The terrain isn't just rugged, but very rugged. So being worn out, worse for wear, and not having any water is ordinarily no big schmooze, no big deal, nothing, But in an extremely remote and extremely rugged terrain, now suddenly the scenario changes. The odds of a mishap and a misstep being compounded by no one being around to help rises sharply. Does that make sense? Now, if we just go to the generic description from Wikipedia, you get some additional insight. The municipality of Buenavista del Norte is located at the extreme northwest point of the island. And what that is just really saying is that it's an extreme, and it's an extremity on an island, which is already a fairly remote island. It's an extremity on an island. And so what does that tell you? There are not a lot of people around. Also, the volcanic massif, and that's also something that's quite unusual. When last were you on a volcano? I think I was last on one on Kilimanjaro, maybe in Namibia, but the volcanic massif emerged during the last 5 to 7 million years. If you've been on a volcano, you know that that substrate is a lot different to other Earth, right? It is sharper, it is more porous, it breaks sometimes. It's just very different. It's quite unstable to walk on as well. And so the Wikipedia description describes a massif furrowed by deep ravines and ends abruptly in the sea. And so what is this saying? There are unusually steep and sharp slopes. And if you want to, another way of thinking about it is new Earth tends to be volcanic, and so the shape of it is very sharp and sheer. Old Earth, it tends to be more rounded and almost like not as high. The altitude is lower because it's been weathered down, right? So there's a very big difference between old Earth and new Earth. And then there's an area known as Los Gigantes. I think it's the area of giants. It's a series of high cliffs that plummet over the sea. The northwest of the island is also, thanks to idiosyncrasies in geography and topography, more humid than other parts of the island. Also something to bear in mind, because more humid means more dehydration. Relative humidity of the air is superior, but then the insolation is inferior, meaning the amount of sun in that part of the island is actually slightly less. There's also another treacherous aspect to the island that I certainly didn't know about. Again, this is from Wikipedia. Most of the water, 90% of the water from Tenerife, comes from wells and from water galleries, which are horizontal tunnels bored into the volcano. Did you know that? Of which there are thousands on the island, thousands of wells. And these are described as important systems that serve to extract its hydrological resources. Get this. These tunnels are very hazardous, with pockets of volcanic gas or carbon dioxide causing rapid death. And now let's get back to the Scottish hiker that was rescued. The Scottish hiker was reported missing by people in Los Carrizales in Buena Vista del Norte after he left for a hike, but he did not return to the starting point for several hours. Officers added that he would not have managed to get out of the ravine by his own means due to the difficulty and the lack of communication in the area that he was found. Basically, just that it was a really steep ravine. By lack of communication, I think they mean no cell service. There usually isn't any when it comes to high mountains and deep ravines, but also perhaps they're referring to a lack of pedestrian traffic. But then, in a bizarre twist, and there probably some of you stopped listening because you were like, don't you know that this has been debunked? But anyway, in a bizarre twist, it seems the rescued hiker feels he didn't need rescuing. According to the Liverpool Echo, 51-year-old David Larkin from Hackney, London, said, I can tell you now, I wasn't tired and I wasn't disoriented and I didn't need rescuing. I think there's a lot lost in translation. I explained to them I had water, I was wearing layers, I had my rucksack with food, and I'm an experienced hiker. Mr. Larkin, a former director of a housing project based in Hackney, I think that's London, arrived in Tenerife earlier this month. He's currently staying in a one-bedroom hut, this is important, on the edge of a cliff. That's the kind of terrain. And embarking on treks across the park. Speaking to Mail Online, he said, I went into the canyon, I saw the helicopters looking and thought they were looking for the lad, but I didn't for 1 minute think they would end up picking me up. I think they want to show how good they are, but I certainly didn't need saving. I feel so sorry for the boy's family and hope he's found soon. I'm actually embarrassed about this. I had my poles and I know what I'm doing, and I knew that if it could get windy, I would take shelter in a cave. I know these trails, I've been coming here for years, so I know what I'm doing. Well, Jay didn't know what he was doing, but it does seem like there are caves in this area. And he was also saying, it can get windy and then I would shelter in a cave. Is that what Jay did? And perhaps Was there some discharge of carbon dioxide or something like that? When he says they want to show how good they are, maybe Jay did. Jay wanted to show that he could walk, he didn't need to catch a bus, or he couldn't wait, or whatever. He didn't want to ask for money. Another thing, when he says about lost in translation, maybe Jay didn't understand about the bus. And maybe what was also lost in translation was which way to his hotel in the south. So my question is, do you believe them? Do you believe the police that this guy was in trouble? Do you think the police exaggerated the danger that he was in and their rescue efforts? Or do you think Larkin is minimizing his own situation? One way to kind of try to establish that is getting to know the character of the landscape a little better. And that's what I'm suggesting we do, is we take this further and get to know it in even more detail. Now, I think there is a little bit of a mystery here. Why did someone raise the alarm? Well, I think it was because he wasn't where they thought he was supposed to be after several hours. They saw this guy that they'd encountered. He didn't come back out the park. And, of course, people are spooked by the search for Jay. It's like this is an area people can go missing. But probably the folks who raised the alarm didn't know that he was staying overnight in the park. And that's the biggest difference between him and Jay. He was staying there. Jay was leaving there in order to go and stay somewhere else. But what's the other difference? He is familiar with the terrain. A hiker who is prepared. Jay, unfamiliar with the terrain and unprepared. And so it might be fair that Larkin didn't need rescuing, but what's also fair is that the cops found him. They were told, look for this guy, and they did, and they found him. Why did they find him? How did they find him? Likely because he was on a path. Is that why they can't find Jay? Because he left the path and then fell. I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.